Welcome to Senior English B, and today we are on page 929 of your hymnals, and we're working with Robert Browning's other offering of our anthology, Porphyria's Lover. Why did I say other offering? Well, let's jot down real quickly at 3A, if you haven't done it for this text, that one obvious comparative text will be for us Last Duchess. If you had to reduce Last Duchess to a single line, it would basically be what?
Murder.
A jealous husband doesn't like the fact that his wife is smiling too much.
That's more than one line.
He gave commands, all smiles stop together. Now, I want to make a quick observation. Is there a necessity, Mr. Keeley, to really argue that he killed her?
Yeah?
No.
No.
Hear the lines again. This grew, I gave commands, all smiles stop together, there she stands as if alive. That's what the poem says. All right? That's all he says. This grew, all of her smiling. I gave commands. Commands to who? We don't know. Then all smiles stop together. There she stands as if alive. Let's point out, there's no direct reason to argue that he killed her immediately. But we can say if he didn't kill her body, he certainly
Killed your spirit.
killed her spirit. That is to say, he said, wow, this smiling, being happy all the time thing has got to stop. And there's a good argument that ultimately this leads to what we do know for sure, and that is she died early. The other dark irony is that this entire conversation is couched in an exchange with a servant who is about to take him downstairs to introduce him to his next duchess, his next wife. Tells us a lot about this gentleman, that he is, of course, interested in trophy wives. He's more interested in a wife that keeps her mouth shut, smiles only at him, does everything she's told. Let's point out something before we get to Porphyria's Lover, which will be for some of you the most disturbing text you've ever read. I'll say it in advance. I'll say it out loud in advance that way. But let's point out something. Browning is living in the Victorian era. And Browning is very aware of the dramatic changes that are starting to take place, the tension that is occurring between males and females. That tension will, of course, explode in the century in which you were born, the 20th century. Notice we're only just a decade away from the 20th century beginning when Browning is writing these poems. He already was aware, back to my shoe factory story, that when Mr. Nelson and Miss Keller, they have their 8 children, but when Nelson loses his job at the shoe factory, their relationship is inevitably going to change. That's happening all over England. It's happening all over Europe. And of course, if you go across the Atlantic, it's as well happening in the United States as well. You'll maybe remember that concurrent readings here from your junior year was that somewhat whacked out story, Yellow Wallpaper. Remember, that was the attempt by an important feminist author to begin to raise some consciousness about the relationship between guys and girls. We're now going to look, of course, at one of the more disturbing poems that Browning ever wrote. It's called Porphyria's Lover. I'm with you on page 929. Now, as per always, we'll read it and then we exegete it. Okay, so let's spend a bit of time now. Let's go ahead and read the poem. For some of you, this will be a first read. That's a tragedy. For others of you, this will be, of course, a reading that follows some work and annotations and the like, right? So that you already got some sense of what's going on. Porphyria's Lover. The rain set in early tonight. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the old tops down for spite and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break. When glided in Porphyria, straight she shut the cold out in the storm and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up and all the cottage warm. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hat, and let the damp hair fall, and last she sat down by my side and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm about her waist, made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping, made my cheek lie there, and spread all her yellow hair, murmuring how she loved me. She, too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride and vainer ties dissever and give herself to me forever. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So she was come through wind and rain. Be sure, I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. At last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew while I debated what to do. That moment, she was mine, fair, perfectly pure, and good. I found a thing to do, and all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around and strangled her. No pain felt she. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily oped her lids. Again laughed the blue eyes without a stain. And I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still, the smiling, rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all it scorned at once is fled, and I its love am gained instead. Porphyria's love, she guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard, and thus we sat together now. All night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. Now, 1 or 2 seniors have argued that this is a text that probably should not appear in a high school anthology.
They're wrong. They're wrong.
There are other students who have argued that of all the crap we've had to read since we were freshmen, this has to be one of the better ones, to which I usually respond, what does that say about anyone that would say that about this poem?
Yeah.
However, before we begin to dissect the readers of the poem as being somewhat psychotic or not, let's spend a bit of time exegeting the text itself. And what I want to say about this poem, as I've often said, is that this is one of the most simply complex poems I teach. By that I mean the following. You'd have to be on some pretty serious LSD to not understand, after especially a reading aloud of the poem, what happens in the poem. In terms of narrative plot, this is about as simple as it gets. I used to love her, but I had to kill her. That's as simple as it gets. But I said it's a simply complex poem because once we start to exegete this poem, we're going to identify some things right away that Browning is doing, which is really tour de force. I mean, this is some really, truly remarkable writing. I want to begin at 2b, and I want to say about this poem what I said about Last Duchess in terms of form. What was the language that we used? Don't say it writing. What was the language that we used with Last Duchess? We said it was a type of writing that Victorian writers used often and regularly, but that for Browning, he was the genius of this form of writing. Remember, we said Romantics love their odes, Victorians love their what? Do you remember? We call them dramatic monologues. We want to make sure that we get both words in the phrase, dramatic monologue. Let's remind ourselves that a dramatic monologue will be a poem in which you have a speaker, very disturbing in this poem, a speaker who is speaking to an assumed audience, not you necessarily. Remember in Last Duchess, he isn't speaking to you. The Duke is actually speaking to a servant. He even says it to him at the beginning of the poem. Would you like to sit down and take a look at the picture of my last wife? I'm the only one that ever lets anybody see her. She is so beautiful. Notice he's still jealous of her even after she's gone. Only I let people see this painting, right? He's jealous of her even after she's dead and gone. He, of course, being the reason for her untimely departure, we might say, right? In Porphyria's Lover now, what we're going to do is we're going to ask 2 fundamental questions. You may want to jot these down in your notes, in your annotations. 2 fundamental questions. 1, who is this speaker in this poem? Who is this person? In Last Duchess, it's defined right away, even in the title, that the speaker is a duke, a man of a 900-year-old name who is telling about a wife that he recently lost Right. He had to lose because she was not the kind of woman who could be really a duchess. She didn't understand the rules of the game, if you will. But who is the one speaking in this poem? We don't have a sense of it at all in the same way from the title. Okay. Secondly, we're going to ask some really, I think, disturbing questions about what he does. What he does. So because here's the deal. Guys and girls will read this poem. Males and females will read this poem. And be unsettled by this simple question. If this is a poem about a guy who takes the long hair of his girl, winds it around her throat 3 times, which tells you how long her hair is, and strangles her to death with her own hair. That's what this poem is about. Question. Does he know in advance this is what he will do? Is it premeditated? Okay. Does he kind of think it out? I think I know what I'm gonna. Or rather, does this poem seem to suggest that this is an action that surprises even him? And if the answer to that question is the second, yeah, it's kind of the second, then that's going to lead to all kinds of interesting psychological questions about what goes on in the mind of the human, in this regards, a male. Because see, this becomes one of the fundamental questions, for example, for young girls at university campuses. So, for example, they're at the party, they meet the guy, he seems like a really nice guy, and he's hot. Right? And they have no ability to know. But can he be trusted? He looks like a nice guy, but can he be trusted? Question, in this poem, does the guy even trust himself? See, this is going to be one of the intriguing psychological questions. And all of a sudden we realize, whoa, Browning is playing a very interesting game with us. He's going to peel back the human psyche for a moment. Notice he's a contemporary of Freud. He's a contemporary. Browning is a contemporary of Freud. Freud's writing Interpretation of Dreams at about the exact same time that Browning is writing this poem. And Browning kind of peeling back the epidermis, psychic epidermis, and asking a really interesting question, is this a normal guy who just snaps? Or is this some kind of psychotic? We will say about the action, that's a psychotic action. But now we're going to ask some psychological questions about him. Of course, there will be some of us that will say, when you read that line about strangled, if this was their first reading, you can answer the question now. For those of you who are working with the poem, for example, last night, I love to ask this question the moment you read the line. Whoa, what did I just... I love to ask students who, for example, are reading this on their own, who will say, I was just kind of reading along, it wasn't very long, so I at least decided I would at least read it. And all of a sudden I got to that line, I'm like, whoa, what did I just read? This is a poem about a guy that kills his girl. And then it's at that point, we start looking back to the beginning of the poem, as we will do now, and some of us will say, whoa, I should have seen this coming. As a matter of fact, Browning set me up big time. So that the moment it happens, whoa, the reader all of a sudden becomes kind of like Porphyria.
I had to go back and read it again.
So that you go back and look at it again, and you go, wait a minute, I should have seen this coming. Is it possible Porphyria in her final dying seconds maybe thought the same thing? Maybe she wouldn't have been so surprised after all. Maybe she knew it was coming. Which begs a really intriguing question. Why did she miss the signs? I don't know. Why did you as a reader miss the signs? Because we don't look normally for that, do we? See, we don't look normally for that. And that is the essence of the poem from its psychological dimension. As I said, this is a simply complex poem. It's fundamentally simple. You can reduce this poem easily to a single line. I used to love her, but I had to kill her. But there's a whole lot more going on. Let's take a look at the poem itself. We're going to start, first of all, by telling a little bit about the environment. Notice he says, or the speaker of the poem, who's never named, notice, he will finish the poem by looking almost right at you through the poem and saying, what? God hasn't said anything. She's sitting here right next to me now. She got every wish she ever wanted. She said she wanted to be with me. I made it happen. You don't have any sense of remorse in this speaker. But notice how the poem begins. The rain set in early tonight. The sullen, look at the adjectives. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break. The opening lines of the poem tells us the storm outside, blowing down trees. He's sitting where? Are we in downtown London? See, we keep reading. I listened with heart fit to break. When glided, look at the verb. When glided in Porphyria, you can see the sarcasm here. Porphyria has been somewhere where he has not been. She's been where? She's all doodadded up. She's all dressed up. Where has she been?
Church.
Well, Mr. Keeley, I think that probably it's an interesting way to say it. It all depends, I suppose, on your definition of church. Yeah. Mr. Keeley is going to suggest that Porphyria has been out.
Promiscuous women.
Well, she's been doing something, let's just say it this way, Mr. Keeley. She's been doing something that probably her lover is not so excited for her to be doing. Can we leave it at that with a PG-13 rated show here in Room 303?
No, I don't understand that.
Notice, when glided in Porphyria, straight, she shut the cold out in the storm. She kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up. The fire's gone out. He's sitting there in the darkness, right? And all the cottage warm, which done, she rose and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl and laid her, look at the adjective, soiled gloves by. Untied her hat and let the damp hair fall. And last she sat down by my side and called me. Aww, she's his lover. She came through wind and rain, we're going to hear, a nasty storm, to come out into the middle of nowhere, right? In the middle of the woods is where this place must be. Trees around everywhere, right? And into the room she comes. She fixes up the fire. She takes off her coat. She takes off her hat. She lets this beautiful long blonde hair fall down. And then she plops down right next to him. Notice, when no voice replied. Uh-oh. She must be talking to him. He is not talking. Why isn't he talking? He is mad. He is mad. He's a pouting, mad little boy of a man. Right? He's pouting, mad little boy of a man. Right? And he sits down. But wait a second. This is sometimes difficult to get the geography quite right. Read it with me. When the voice replied, she put my arm about her waist and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping, made my cheek lie there. Now, you got to get a picture here, because it's going to be important at the end of the poem. She sits down. He's sitting there. He's pouting. Man, he's jealous, man. She sits down. She takes her hair, her long hair. She moves it. She displaces. She makes her shoulder bare. She'll pull maybe her dress down, which tells us immediately that they are not strangers. She's been here before. Can we say it that way? There's a sense of intimacy here. She then will take his head and she'll make it lay over on her shoulder. Who is higher then? Which head is higher?
Hers.
Her head by definition must be higher for his head to incline on her shoulder. She came in, notice, she's done everything. He has said nothing, he's done nothing. He's just sitting there. He is seething mad. Then she starts to talk, murmuring how she loved me. Notice the dashes. She, too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride and vainer ties dissever and give herself to me forever. Let's just put it in your notes. Browning clearly playing with the Victorian question of men understanding relationships with women as possession. Notice what he says. I wanted her to give herself to me forever. Possession. She said she loved me. But she needed to cut or sever vainer ties. In other words, enough with the other ones. Enough with the other guy. I want you to belong to me and only me. Notice he says she murmurs about how she loves him. But she's too weak to give herself entirely to him. Keep reading. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. So she was come through wind and rain. Then he says, be sure, uh-oh, here it is. This tells you the geography of the heads. I looked up at her eyes, happy. That should remind us of last Duchess, huh? And proud. At last, I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Is this what men want? Is a woman who worships them? Let me say it this way. Is this what men want even though they don't realize it?
Well, then how are we going to know that?
I think worship's too strong of a word.
Yeah.
Notice the word surprise. Notice the word surprise. It's like, oh, she loves me. Surprise made my heart swell and still it grew while I debated what to do. Guys, this is no premeditated act. He doesn't know what he's sitting there like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? She loves me. She truly loves me. She totally worships me. What do I do? What do I do? Notice, keep reading. The moment she was mine fair, perfectly pure and good. Notice no soiled here, right? I found a thing to do. And all her hair in one long yellow string, I wound 3 times her, notice the adjectives, little neck around, and strangled her. It's as if in him saying this, he knows that you, who he's speaking to, are going to go, you did what? So notice the next line. Oh, no, don't worry. No pain felt she. I'm quite sure she felt no pain. She got exactly what she wanted, he says.
Pretty sure she didn't ask to be strangled.
Notice that what happens next. Stay with me. This is crucial. As a shut, look at the simile. Follow it. By the way, we'll work right up until the bell rings because I want to help you for the exam. We're only halfway through the poem, by the way. You're looking at it on the page. We're only halfway through the poem. As a shut bud that holds a flower, I warily oped her lids again. They laughed. Her eyes. It's like she came back to life. He says, I unwound. And of course, we know that once something's strangled, if you unwind it, it's going to push blood back up to make her look alive. Not alive anymore. She's dead. Without notice a stain. I untightened next the tress around her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. For the first time, now he kisses her. Before she kissed him. Wait a minute, who's in control now?
Yes.
He's in control now. Keep reading. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still. Now this is when this poem starts to get kind of freaky. It's as if they're sitting there right now, and he's talking directly to you. And you're like asking him, dude, what's going on? She doesn't look to me like she's alive. Oh, I got to tell you the story. A while ago, the weather was really nasty. She came in, she glides through the room, she does all this. She sits next to me, she does her thing, she starts murmuring about how she loves me, etc., etc. Thanks, guys. We'll come back tomorrow and discuss some more.